Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in on what is a lovely day. So I'm hoping this is a slightly quicker one so I can get out into the garden. That's just me. No, don't worry. I'll stay for as long as there are questions. So as Ross says, 20, 30 minutes of lecture and then some questions afterwards. And I've just noticed our good friend Jimmy Bain has wished everybody a happy birthday because, of course, today is the anniversary of the battle, or at least one element of the battle. However, vitrified now. I will explain what vitrification is, but basically it involves fire. Scotland has the highest density of vitrified forts in the world, and they were first discovered in Scotland at the end of the 18th century and were thought to be volcanoes. The illustration in front of you is courtesy of the Forestry Commission and relates, I think, to one of the ones outside Inverness. Now, if we get slide 2, please, Ross. So, vitrification, right, is the process by which a timber-laced rampart is set fire to, and the fire is maintained for a sufficient period of time for the temperature to reach in excess of 1,000 degrees centigrade. What then happens is the water content of the rocks boils out, the rocks begin to melt and fuse with each other. So what we have here is the black and white picture shows you the voids for timber lacing. So timber beams went that way through. The bottom left gives you an indication of why you would do a timber lacing. And basically it's to achieve a greater height. So you have a timber framework, you fill that with stones in the manner of a kind of structural groin that you see with the wires. And if that is set fire to, then there's fuel through the rampart. The kind of gaps for the timber lacing act as flues, the interior superheats, and you get the vitrification, right? So if we have the next slide, please. Now, there are various different counts of vitrified forts, but you can see from this map, they're found all over Scotland. There are between 70 and 30, and the number changes because some are discounted and new ones are identified. So basically, vitrification occurs whenever someone has set fire to a fort in the past. So they are quite frequent, and they have, pardon me, there is no chronological distinction to vitrification. They happen from 1000 BC all the way through to 1000 AD. They are no longer unique to Scotland, although at present none have been found in England. They are found in Wales, Northern Ireland, and across the continent. They're all over the place. Right, next slide, please, Ross. So if you set fire to something, there are two prevailing models, academic models, as to why you would set fire to something. The first is in celebration. So like a bonfire, like fireworks. So this is the Las Vegas model where things are an enormous celebration. It's an enormous bonfire. And you have, you're celebrating, you're commemorating something. The second model is more or less the Dresden model, where what you're looking at is an act of war, a destructive act to deny a civilian population a resource, to deny a military opponent a military resource. So we might remember, or you might remember, that Bruce sacks castles once he captures them. So he sacked Stirling Castle once he captured it from the English after the Battle of Bannockburn, which the anniversary of which, let's think through this, is Friday. So Bruce sacked the castle on Friday, 700 odd years ago. So these are the two prevailing models. There used to be something that suggested that vitrification might be a constructive technique, i.e. you might do it in order to make the rampart stronger, because obviously fused rocks together, that looks very impressive. So was it done to make the fort stronger? Now, generally, no one accepts that these days. There's no evidence of vitrification lying inside a rampart, only a damaged rampart There's no evidence of occupation surface associated with vitrified ramparts. And also the experiments that have been done, and there are 3 or 4 different sets of experiments over the last 150 years, are incredibly difficult and incredibly hard. So it's very unpredictable. So everybody thinks it is a destructive process rather than a constructive process. Next slide, please, Ross. So my title was slightly misleading. I am going to talk about Stirling's vitrified forts, but in order to draw the full meaning of them, I'm going to talk about some vitrified forts in Aberdeenshire. So we have the 2 circles on this map. This map, incidentally, maps the majority of Scotland's hill forts. There's a constant coming and going as to what is a hill fort, so there are lots of distribution maps. But you can see that the bulk of them really are in the south and the southeast, southwest, and there are small clusters as you move into the kind of highland zones. So Stirling and Aberdeenshire, 2 sets of vitrified forts, 2 sets of evidence, so 2 sets of discussion. Next slide, please. Now, obviously, everybody will have seen this map before. This shows Paris's medieval map. It is grossly inaccurate, but it reveals a strategic reality. It has 1 bridge, which is in the circle. That bridge is at Stirling. So Stirling is not marked, Stirling Bridge is marked. It's the only bridge worthy of being mentioned in the whole of Britain, because if you want to venture north of the Forth, you have to go through Stirling Bridge. Now, of course, the bridge to the left here is only 500 odd years old, perhaps 550, and when it was built is widely argued to be the biggest bridge in Scotland. We get the next slide, please. And we have the underlying geography. So the dark green is the flood valley of the Forth. The pale green are the land masses. This illustrates the shortest land crossing. Of course, coincides with the upper tidal limit of the Forth. And there are fords, a very good ford at Cambuskenneth, a rather poor ford at under Stirling Bridge, between the current old bridge and the Stevenson Bridge. You can probably walk across low tide, it doesn't go above your knees. I've done it, and there's a rather rubbish one at Kildene, and then you're up to the dikes at the other side of Kildene, and probably Drip. There may be a ford at Drip, there's certainly a ford at Craigarnhall on the Teeth. So these are the crossing points, but the main one between that short land crossing is at Stirling, and the 3 sets of arrows there relate to the 3 vitrified forts. So from the south, Moat Hill, which is under the beheading stone, then we're looking to the one under the Wallace Monument, and then we're looking to Demyat. Castle, not Demyat, which is the smaller peak in front of it. So quickly running through the evidence. Next slide, please, Ross. This is Moat Hill, which is above Sainsbury's, the beheading stone, the 2 cannons. We have a very mutilated fort here, 2 phases of occupation. The interior one is vitrified. That dates to around 150 AD, destroyed by fire, potentially destroyed by fire by the Romans. Seems to be something connected with the Roman trade north and south of the Forth. That's quite interesting. Next slide, please. This is the fort at Abbey Craig. This has 3 sets of ramparts. The construction of the Wallace Monument mutilated the interior. It was built there in part because it overlooks Wallace's great victory, but also because it's on top of the hill for the geology, but also because archaeologists thought that the hill fort was Wallace's HQ. Now, of course, they may have used the site, but it's far older. And the occupation, and there are 3 sets of ramparts on this hill, the occupation dates to between 500 AD and 900 AD, and this is fortified against a variety of people. So probably this is a fort of Manow. So Manow is the name of the kingdom here. So the people are the Maiathi, Clackmannan, Slabannan, and in terms of, there are 4 sets of No, we've got that. So Damait and Mait are the names of the Maithi. Slaman and Clackmannan are the two north-south names for Manau, and there's one at Balfron and there's one at Fife as well. The latter two I can never quite remember. There's a Rathmannan in Fife and a Crowmannan at Balfron, I think, which illustrate the boundaries of that kingdom. So this fort is built to control the crossing point for the people of Manau. It comes under attack from the Angles, from the Picts, from the Scots, from the Britons, who are in Strathclyde, and latterly from the Vikings. It really does get a good battering. The two ramparts are vitrified. So the inner rampart and the outer rampart are vitrified. We don't know if that is the same act or two separate sets of vitrification. And the outer rampart was built using or reusing vitrified stone. So, next slide, please. Is Damait. I should have changed this slide. We have a much more accurate survey of this one. And people will remember September last year, we did the first excavation of the site. The site has doubled in size. Because we found outworks. We have charcoal from those, which is currently being dated, and that should be quite interesting. And we may go back next year, depending on permissions. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned some things before, specifically to do with Abbey Craig, but actually, these events here are all potentially hostile invasions that could involve crossing at Stirling, that could be connected to the destruction of any of those forts, Moat Hill, Abbey Craig, Damait. Obviously, Moat Hill is more likely to be connected to the earlier Roman activity, Damait, Abbey Craig to the latter activity. Damait, we don't know yet, and fingers crossed we will find out soon when we get the radiocarbon dates, but Damait probably straddles the Roman occupation into what we call the Dark Ages, or more appropriately today we tend to call them the early medieval, and for no other reason than it's simply brilliant. The object here is known as the Fritzheim Dice Tower, which was found in Germany. It's a Roman military gambling object. You put dice in at the top and you gamble on the outcome as they spill out, and it is the only object in the world to name the Picts. And of course, the Picts are first mentioned 297 in Roman sources, and we have a variety of engagements, of wars, of campaigning north and south. So their period roughly between 300 to 400 AD is often called the Pictish Wars, and we have a lot of coming and going north and south, all of which will have impacted on the Stirling, and of course potentially some of these forts. And of course the inscription on the Fritzheim Dice Tower says, "Picts defeated, the enemy wiped out, play without fear." And there is, in Septimius Severus's campaigns of the early 200s, so earlier than the Picts, he demands that his soldiers basically carry out a genocide in what is Scotland for breaking of a treaty terms. Right. So my conclusion here for the specific location around Stirling is that all of these forts were vitrified due to military aggression, that we are looking at acts of destruction perpetrated by invading armies. It serves both to destroy critical infrastructure at a strategic location, but also to send a warning. Now, if you just think back to something like Damait being on fire, you think about the whole of the top of Damait, or Castle Law Damait being on fire. What's that? 40, 50 meters of fire. Now, in order to get vitrification, the fire needs to be 3 days, 4 days, maybe a week. So if you can imagine Damait being on fire for a week, you can see the smoke during the day dominates the entire the Forth Valley. You'd see it north-south. Imagine how far you would see the fire at night. An awesome statement of power, an awesome symbol of regime change, right? So that's when I think about the Stirling ones. Next slide, please, Ross. So we are up to, oh, sorry, yes, the Aberdeenshire sites. I have jumped ahead. And next slide, please, Ross, again. So this is the series of sites I did my PhD on. This is the Don Valley. Aberdeen is to the bottom right of that map, and you can see a number of forts. There are roughly 20 within this, all different shapes and sizes, but I'm going to focus on the two most vitrified forts. Now, actually, three of them are vitrified: Hillabara, Bruce's Camp, Dunadeer, and Tappa North. But we'll go to the next slide, please, Ross. Now, Tappa North and Dunadeer are the two most vitrified forts in the world. Tappa North has recently been in the news. Gordon Noble of Aberdeen University has managed to date both the interior fort and the exterior fort. And we will be focusing on the interior one, so the massive oblong fort. You see the grey of the stone, and Dunadeer and Tappa North are the same type of fort. I see someone has spoken about Benihee. If that's a quick question. Benihee is not vitrified. Gordon has dated that one. There was some previous work on there before. It's an early medieval Pictish site. The two forts here, these are part of the oblong series. These are found across Scotland, and I'll show you how far they extend later on. But these tend to have 4 to 6 meter wide ramparts. The ramparts tend to be 2 to 4 meters high. They're always oblong. They're always on very, very prominent hills, and you'll see how prominent they are later on. And they tend to be found without gates, and they date to around 200 BC. Right, next slide, please, Ross. And here we have the view of Tappa North, just some detail of it. And again, look at those stones. Now, you can see the track running in. That's wide enough to take a Land Rover running in. And you can see exactly where that hill fort was there on top, the kind of highest point of the peak. Like a little, it does look like a volcano here, but you can imagine that all of that stone had to be carried up to the top of that hill. Just astonishing. Right, so next slide, please, Ross. This shows you the focus. There are two clusters of oblong forts, one around Inverness, one around Dundee. Now, they more or less all date to around 200 BC, as I was saying, and they're all more or less the same. They're all oblong, they're all massive, and they tend not to have gates. In fact, none of them have gates. So if we were looking to explain this specific type of architecture in the context of warfare or military aggression, it's a bit tricky. Might we imagine that they are perhaps last ditch citadels in the evidence of a campaign? Seems a bit odd, perhaps. And why would they have such a wide geographic range? So I'm not entirely happy with that. So let's look again at the sites. It's a quick reminder of what they look like. Sorry, Ross, next slide, that's my fault. And next slide again, please. So here are the facts and the figures. Right. Now, I know this. I got radiocarbon dates of Dunadeer. I've also got some archaeomagnetic dates. Now, the archaeomagnetic dates tell you when the magnetic reading of the rock changed when it was set fire to, and there had been some earlier arc-mag dates from Tappa North. So if we have a look, we can see that Tappa North is bigger and at a higher altitude than Dunadeer. We can see that Dunadeer was actually destroyed earlier. Now, just to explain this, the dates from both sets of sites are not the occupation, they are the destruction point. So the date range there expresses a statistical uncertainty. So Dunadeer was destroyed sometime between 390 and 257 BC. That means it was built prior to that point. judging from the kind of range of dates from the other sides, it's most likely built and then destroyed sometime around 250 BC. Now, Tapa North was destroyed sometime between 200 and 0 BC, which means it was built prior to that point. Now, again, looking at the date range, it's most likely to have been built and destroyed around 200 BC. That means that there is a minimum 50-year period, 50-year gap between the construction and destruction of these two sites. And I also, if it wasn't particularly clear, the two sites are intervisible. And if you're on Dunadir, you just look due west and you can see Tapa North. So I don't think that a military act of aggression makes sense in the context of Tapa North and Dunadir. I cannot imagine that a war might have lasted 50, 60 years. I cannot have imagined that the whole area of Scotland from Inverness to Dundee was dominated by a war. And I cannot imagine that the tactics remained the same across such a large area and such a prolonged period of time. So in this particular case, I think that these two forts, and indeed the other oblong forts, are what we might call conspicuous consumption. So this is, say if your neighbour wins the lottery and they go out and buy a Lamborghini to show off. So they are spending their money in a conspicuous and showing off manner. So I think that this is exactly what we're looking at. We're looking at a community or multiple communities that have built a hill fort. It's a very impressive hill fort. It's taken a lot of effort to drag the stone, the timber up the hill. And then at some point, after it's served a function, it is destroyed. Now, the process of gathering the timber, and you've got to remember, you need far more timber to destroy the rampart than you do to construct it. So it's again an act that might take years, might take months of effort to drag the timber up the hill, to set fire to it, an enormous party, an enormous celebration. And then I think their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren did the same thing again at Tapa North, but they were determined to make it bigger and better and to show off. And that's why Tapa North is later, bigger and higher than Dunadir. Now, of course, that's just a theory, but I think it fits the evidence. Right, final slide, Ross, please. So, in answer to my original question, what is the context for vitrification? I think it is both destruction and celebration, depending on the strategic context of the site location and depending on the scale and extent of the vitrification. And if I didn't make it clear before, perhaps, I said that Tapa North and Dunadir were the most vitrified forts in the entire world. That's correct. Their entire circuits are vitrified. And in the case of both of them, it's likely that this required at least 2 attempts to vitrify the circuit, given the prevailing wind. Anyway, apologies for that, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. I'll just unpause that. And if you'd like to give a round of applause for Murray on another fantastic talk there.
Thank you very much.
That was brilliant. Very, very interesting on the whole process, vitrification, and the labour involved in that. I'm very interested. So we'll open up the questions. If anybody does have a question, just raise your hand and we can unmute you. Hi, Colin.
Hi, Murray. What can you say about the sizes of populations that are needed to support either the construction or the occupation? Because if you're going to spend that much effort on building something, you've got to be living comfortably.
Yes. Well, the populations are a great mystery to us, really. The Don Valley is probably one of the richest areas in Scotland. It has an abundance of good soil. It has an abundance of salmon. There are a variety of things about the Don Valley that make it an absolutely rich area to live in. Now, the difficulty with the populations count, so I don't think that Dunedin and Tapa North were lived in per se. They might have been gathered in, but you are looking at, there are some enclosed settlements in the surrounding area that have 2.5 hectares in extent. They are perhaps 50, 60 houses. The number of houses on the Tapa North external fort, which Gordon has estimated at perhaps being 300 to 400, if you're looking at 300 to 400 houses. Admittedly, this is 600 years later than this. So I think the population is actually quite large. We must be looking at several hundreds, perhaps several thousand. But of course, what area is the population supporting Dunadir? Does it extend to Aberdeen? Does it extend to Peterhead? Are people coming in the summer? We're looking at an agricultural society, so there are periods where the crops have been planted and they don't need to be tended. The other issue is perhaps this took 10 years to build, perhaps it took 20 years to build, and perhaps it took 10 years to assemble the materials to destroy it. Elsewhere, so Brocksmith in East Lothian, there are indications that there are generational phases of repair. So, and there's some idea that people had an obligation. So if you have the right to graze a field or fish in a river or fish on the coast, that in order to maintain and secure those rights, you had to do maintenance on the communal site. So perhaps what we're looking at is a month a year, people gathered in order to construct a section of rampart. Perhaps what we're looking at is Grandad has started it and the grandchildren finish it. I think there's any number of things. So it's always, I don't necessarily think these things they're done in a year. We could be looking at a decade worth of activity to construct them. But certainly Aberdeenshire has some of the, in terms of mainland Scotland, it has some of the best archaeological evidence in Scotland. There, if you think back through time, the Pictish symbol stones are there, the recumbent stone circles are there, the Neolithic carved stone balls are there. We're looking at a very rich society. The largest Neolithic ceremonial monument in mainland Scotland was outside Inverurie. Unfortunately was destroyed at the end of the 18th century, but it was akin with stones of Stenness or Callanish. So there was a society of enormous wealth and significance for thousands of years in the Don Valley.
Thank you very much, Murray. I had a couple of wee questions there. I found it really fascinating you were talking about how you were able to date the vitrification process through the changing of the magnetic.
Yes.
How does that work, or what's the theory behind that? What's that methodology? That's really interesting.
I don't really know how it works, but I've seen it done. So what happens is if you fire something, so an organic material, stone or pottery even, the iron, I may have to be corrected, but the principle is that the iron-rich content of the stone or the clay is somehow frozen at a particular period in time, and then comparing that magnetic reading to current magnetic readings, the variation between the two allows you to calculate the date at which the magnetic reading of the stone or the pottery was fixed. It has quite a wide error range. It's much wider than radiocarbon dates from charcoal. Charcoal tends to be a couple of 100 years. Arc mag tends to be kind of 500, 700. So for Dunadir, we had charcoal from a destruction layer associated with the destruction of the rampart, as well as the Arc mag dates. But of course, Tap and North had been Arc mag dated, and if anybody wants to read more about archaeomagnetism, there's a lot of new PhDs that have been done on them. It's quite a wide-ranging set of evidence. There's people in Lancaster do it, and people in Bradford, and there are a number of PhDs available online if people want to kind of explore that.
So it's fast. I take it that's quite a new development in the field then.
No,
Is that been...
it kicked off in the 70s.
Right.
It's just expensive and hard to do because you need. I mean, if I put a hole in a fort and I find charcoal, I can take the material for the dating. If you want to get an Arc mag date, you have to get the Arc mag person to do it, and they have to come up. And it's just far more expensive. So it's not routinely done in archaeology in the same way that radiocarbon dating is done.
Thank you. Awesome. Is there any other questions around the room? If you just raise your hand or put one in the chat. I see that actually Catherine's made a point. I'll cut Catherine's point. If you, there you go. Harry. Yeah, awesome.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maury. I was just trying to, I think your argument's quite a good one for the idea that if you can complete vitrification, that sounds like a ceremonial process, and a great effort's been made to arrange that and do that. Am I right in thinking, though, that the kind of the warlike destruction is more like the Apache partial process, and the fort may not be fully vitrified?
Yes, I think the trouble is that there has not yet been. I'm thinking through this. So Dunadir and Abbey and Tap and North, the vitrification is visible, so you can walk around it and see the extent. If you walk around Dunadir, if you walk around Abbey Craig, excavation of the middle rampart reveals vitrification, but it's not the same extent. Excavation of the internal rampart reveals vitrification, and if you walk around the slopes, you can actually see some of it, but it's nowhere near the same scale. It's nowhere near the same scale. So, yes, it's definitely patchier. It's definitely smaller. I think it might be focused around gateways too. But again, nobody's done that level of quantitative assessment, if that makes sense, on the degrees of it all. But the principle would be right. I think it's a much smaller scale because the point you're making is to destroy something, whereas the point they're making with the larger forts is this ceremonial point. I feel that quite strongly. Yeah. Also, once we have the early medieval accounts, so texts, so we actually have description of forts being set fire to in the early medieval history of Scotland. So Dunad, for example, is besieged. I can't remember if Dunad is set fire to. Dunotter is set fire to. And there's an excellent paper by the kind of father of all this archaeology, Leslie Alcock, where he systematically lists every single account mention of warfare on early medieval fortified sites. It's well worth having a look. And of course, I very happily give all these references to anybody if they want them. That Leslie Alcock paper from about 1981.
Thanks.
Thank you. We had a question there. Catherine was asking about the there was a for some of you that might not have seen it, there was a little song that we played at the sort of first 5 minutes as people were coming in. It was the Gargoyles of Gargunnock. But
Yes.
I'll put a link to that and the link if anybody wants to go and watch after this song was on.
They're very good, but you mustn't call them the Gargoyle Gunnock. Oh no, hang on. They want to be the Gargoyles of Gargunnock rather than the Gargunnock Gargoyles. I get into trouble with them if I get their name wrong.
Yeah, no, they've got some amazing voices on them, and they do a lot of old
great,
songs for various
Very
different
good.
medieval periods and stuff. So yeah, very, very fascinating. Catherine asked the question saying it's very inspirational for when the lockdown is over. Would you love to do a physical tour with them? I'm assuming on the forts. Is that something? I know you've said previously about doing some talks around the walls and things. Which you've done
I
before.
certainly always. I tend to do a lot of the walks in September, and always very happy to do any number of these out. But there is. Abbey Craig is obviously opening. Moat Hill is an easy climb, so very happy to do these things. But it might be rather disappointing because what you're looking at about 10 minutes worth of talk on the hill once you've got there. But no, I certainly hope to return to a kind of full package of walks and engagement with people once lockdown's over.
I take it a lot of these sites are just, I mean, of course, take respect and thing, but you'd be able to walk up to them when lockdown measures allow.
Yes, well, remember the right to roam basically allows responsible access to everything that isn't in someone's garden. So, all these forts are accessible. So, Moat Hill and Abbey Craig are probably the most accessible forts in Scotland. I might say Moat Hill is the most accessible because it's literally easier. It is the easiest to walk up. Moat Hill has, it has interpretation boards, and I did an audio tour for Moat Hill. So if you go up and you look at the board, there's a web link that would take you to me talking for a couple of minutes about the site. Trying to think through Abbey Craig, again, nice and easy to go up and see. You have to scramble around through the brambles to see the vitrified stone, though. And if anybody really wants to see a vitrified stone, I actually have an enormous collection of vitrified stones. I have one the size of my laptop. So if anybody wants to see it at some point, I'll very happily arrange that.
Brilliant. Sorry, I'm choking a bit there. Is there any other questions around the room?
I saw a question from Colin about is there a fort at North Third, and there is a fort at North Third immediately above the Windy Yet Gate Glen. So if you walk up the Windy Yet, you are immediately under it. It has 2 or 3 sets of ramparts, best seen in the winter when the bracken is dead. No one's dug it at all, and it kind of glares at the one on Gillies Hill.
There was another question I just noticed when I was scrolling up the chat. I was asking about how many trees. I know you said that it's quite an intensive process. It needs days, weeks of burning. Is that a small forest? Are we talking a couple of acres, hectares?
That's not something I know, but they are oak. The framework tends to be oak. So you are looking at oak beams, and I'm just trying to remember, but if we went to that first slide, Ross, or the second slide, and you can see that those are 1/2 foot square, those timber beams on that timber frontage. So, and those are 1/2 foot square, and they must be 2-3 meters long. So, and then if you imagine that the fort is probably 30 meters wide, 100 meters long. I mean, I think you're looking at small woods. You know, I think you're looking at acres of mature oak forest to actually prepare these, and that's to construct them. And I think you're looking at more wood again to burn them. The question would be whether you could also use pine or any of the pine or alder or the kind of softer woods, if it has to be oak. But the feeling is the fire has to be oak in order to get the temperature going. And the most famous experiment was done by my old professor Ian Ralston, which featured on Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World in about 1979. And he burnt a section of timber rampart for a weekend and got 2 grains of vitrified stone. They were in his, they fit in the palm of his hand. They were tiny, absolutely tiny. So, yeah, pardon me, it's a lot of wood. It's a very, very high status symbol. So that, I think, of course, is the prehistoric, the ritual consumption. I think that the later early medieval ones probably used as much wood in the construction, but they're all smaller forts, tend to be smaller forts, and I think that the vitrification itself is smaller scale. I think it's focused around the gates, so I think less timber would be used for the vitrification in the later forts, if that makes sense.
I mean, does this tie into like the Wicker Man and things like that? Is this? I know you said this was in with the Pictish time, so you said it would likely be destructive and maybe ceremonial. Is that tie in with it in any way?
Yeah, I mean, there's there is a tradition of burning things in native societies going back to the Neolithic. There's large numbers of Neolithic monuments are ritually burnt at the end of their lifespan. So one of the largest Neolithic houses built in Scotland is at Clash, just outside Callander, and that was set fire to. So there's an awful lot of timber monuments are just set fire to at the end of their life. I think that print, and without using the specific reference of the Wicker Man and obviously human sacrifice, I think looking at the ritual use of fire is spectacular. There are a set of stone circles in Aberdeenshire. They're recumbent stone circles, so these are Neolithic to early Bronze Age, depending precisely what's going on. But these seem to start with bonfires. The site of the bonfire is then surrounded by stone circle. The stone circles tend to be quartz-rich stones, and the richest quartz-rich stone side of the stone, if this makes sense, is selected to face the interior. So there seems to be something that what you're looking at is the use of quartz for nighttime rituals, because quartz looks different in firelight and moonlight. And there is an excellent book by Richard Bradley on recumbent stone circles called The Moon and the Bonfire. And I think you're looking at the ritual use of fire in that context. And obviously you can appreciate how disorientating things can be. A bonfire at night, looking at the light and looking away from the light, the warmth. I mean, the fire might have been in the middle of the winter. I mean, once you let your imagination go, these might be responses to climate change, to a particularly bad set of seasons. Perhaps they felt they had to set fire to the hill in order to restart the sun. You know, as long as you don't involve aliens or break the laws of physics, I think we're capable of anything in the past. Absolutely.
No, very, very fascinating. I know. I mean, it's that whole thing. It's a archetypal feature fire, whether it be Promethean or whatever, always reoccurs and everything. But very interesting, we're talking about the quartz. There was a question as well coming, I think it was from Susan. Oh no, sorry. Two questions. I'll ask them at the one time. How would you recognise a bit of vitrified stone if you were to pick it up? No taking away, of course. And does the vitrification process depend on the type of stone itself? Would something more slate or dodamite or something have impacts on this process?
Yes. So vitrified stone looks like slag. So just it actually looks like waste from metallurgy. Yes, and the degree of vitrification, yes. So stone does, so the harder the stone, the harder it is to burn. So you get vitrified forts that are made of limestone. The absence of vitrified forts in England is probably just to do with the geology, just to do with actually the combination of things being set fire to and things being vitrified. So I think I think lots of forts are probably set fire to. I think very few of them get vitrification. I think in most cases, vitrification is an accidental byproduct, with the possible exception of Dunadir and Tap North, where I think it was the deliberate outcome. And in Scotland, the silica-rich nature of our sandstone makes it easier to vitrify.
I had myself on mute there. Excellent. Thanks very much for answering that one, Murray. Thanks very much. Really interesting ritual use of fire. Ness of Brogar, now Kilbones found. So yeah. So maybe animal sacrifice, I think, or something like that along the lines of ritual use.
I mean, obviously we have to be careful not to glorify things, but sacrifice, human sacrifice, animal sacrifice is a constant of religions. I mean, you can take a particular view of Christianity in that on two occasions God actually demands sacrifice. You know,
and uses medium
Abraham's, yeah. Well, exactly. Abraham's son, and latterly the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. Certainly, animal sacrifice. The Roman military required some kind of animal sacrifice at least once a week when they were on campaign. So, I'm sure that's the case.
Excellent. Is there any other questions from the room? No, I don't think so. Well, again, really enjoyed this. I know everyone else has. There's been many comments saying thank you and really enjoyed the lectures.
Good.
So Murray, I've done absolutely tremendous. So again, if I can ask everybody to give a virtual round of applause. Thank you all very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, everyone.
All the best. We have a new schedule of lectures. We'll be posting that up on Facebook. But I think next week we have Colin talking about
oh no, that's me again, Ross.
Oh, have I got my dates up a week ahead of myself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Next week is the Atlantic Wall.
Oh, yeah,
Scotland's
of course.
most important archaeological site.
Excellent. Again, look forward to it. So thank you all.
No problem. Cheers, Ross.
Cheers,
bye.